Alright, hey everybody. So based on what happened last time, you couldn't see anything. So I'm going to keep that video up. Anyway, so just in case this one goes too fast, you have something that goes a little bit slower to go over everything. Alright, well, I'm hoping by now you know how to fill in the unit circle and you know how to fill in the chart. So I'm just going to put in the answers. So I'm not going to go through a whole process of how I get my answer. I'm hoping that by now you know how. And this is just pretty much trying to see if you got the right answers. So basically like a check. Sorry, this is so boring. I'm just trying to fill in the answers. Alright, so just check your answers with the chart according to what I have here. So I'll give you a second to check that. I will not be answering, filling in the unit circle. I'm just going to remind you of the things that are important. We need quadrants. You need signs. And then you need each piece filled in. That'll get you full credit. Alright, moving on to the next part. Basically, if you know your unit circle, you'll be able to do all of this. Alright, find a negative and positive negative coterminal angle for the following. Remember, the main rule is alpha plus 360k. Alpha stands for angle. So you're basically going to take your angle and add it to 360 times whatever value you choose for k. Since there's no real stipulation for the angle and how big it's supposed to be, you can pretty much plug in anything you want to get the coterminal angle. So for here, I'm going to do 750 plus 360 times 1. And when I do that, I get 390. Now, 390 is a positive coterminal, so I need a negative. So then I'll do 750 plus 360 times 2. When I do that, that gives me 30 degrees. So that's not going to work. And actually, the first one was supposed to be -1. So I'm going to try to do, like I said, -2 won't work. So -3 will be the next one. And that gives me -330. So now I have one positive, one negative. Had you decided to multiply this by +1, you would have gotten a really big coterminal angle, which is fine. As long as you have one positive, one negative answer, it really doesn't matter what you plug into here. Alright, the next one is negative 420. Since it's negative, I kind of like to work with positives. That's when I do the whole add 360 thing. But, you know, if you don't want to do that, it's fine. You could work with negative 420. Just make sure that you pick numbers that are big enough to have one be positive and one be negative. So I'm going to plug in 1 here. And I get negative 60 degrees. I need a positive, so I'm going to try 360 times 2. And I wind up getting 300. So I have one positive, one negative. I'm done. On to the next one. Alright, next section. First thing you should always do is draw your axis with the signs. And then you should also indicate for yourself where tangent is positive, or where all of them are positive actually. So all are positive in the first, sine is positive in the second, tangent is positive in the third, and then cosine is positive in the fourth. Now each of your axes is where you'll be seeing the undefined. So you probably have to refer back to your chart if you see the word undefined. Alright, first one says sine is less than 0, that means sine is negative. And cosine is less than 0, that means cosine is negative. The only time that happens is in the third quadrant. So that first answer is 3. Okay, next one says cosecant is undefined. If we go back to the chart, you'll see that cosecant is undefined in a few places. It's undefined at 0, undefined at 180, and undefined at 360. Okay? Now, you have to also look to see what else they're asking for. So we just said 0, 180, and 360 cosecant is undefined. And then they want to know where is tangent equal to 0. So if you go back to your chart, tangent is equal to 0 at 0, 180, and 360. Now, since it wants you to indicate the axis, 0 and 360 is what we call the positive x-axis, and 180 is the negative x-axis. So we would just indicate that this is the positive x-axis and the negative x-axis. And that would be the answer to the question. Okay, last one says tangent is negative. So I know that tangent is negative in the second and fourth quadrant. And then it says that secant is positive. Well, secant is related to cosine. So that's basically saying that cosine is positive. And that happens in the fourth quadrant. So the answer to this question is fourth quadrant. Alright, so that takes care of 1 through 5. Are you guys okay? Alright, now looking for the next section in terms of reference angles. Remember, each quadrant has their own rule. First quadrant stays the same, so if you're given an angle in the first quadrant, you don't have to do anything to find the reference angle. If you're given something in the second quadrant, you're going to do the angle minus 180. Remember, alpha stands for angle. So you're giving an angle in the second quadrant, you're going to, backwards. You're going to do 180 minus the angle. If you're in the third quadrant, it'll be the angle minus 180. And if you're in the last quadrant, it'll be 360 minus the angle. If your angle is positive or over 360, you have to, if your angle is negative or over 360, you have to get it to be between 0 and 360 before you do the reference angles. So the first one here says negative 150. So I'm going to add 360 to this because I don't want any negative numbers when trying to find my reference angle. So adding 360 should give me a positive. And it does. Positive 210. 210's in the third quadrant, so I'm going to do 210 minus 180, which gives me 30 degrees as my reference angle. Because remember, reference angles are always between 0 and 90. Okay, next one is 405. I'm going to take 405 and subtract it from 360 because it's too big. And I get 45. Once I get that, that's between 0 and 90. I'm done. Last one's 293, also in the third quadrant, so I subtract that from 180. And I get 113 degrees. So, oops, you guys didn't fix me. Womp womp. Because 113 degrees is not between 0 and 90. And 293 is not in the third quadrant. It is in the fourth quadrant. So we actually have to subtract the 360 from the 293 from 360. And you get 67. Woo! Don't let things happen like that. Remember, reference angles must always be between 0 and 90. Alright, the next section is all about the unit circle. So the first one says that cosine is negative square root of 3 over 2. Well, I know that cosine is negative in the second and third quadrant. And I also know the only time I see square root of 3 over 2 in the second and third quadrant for cosine is at 150 and at 210. So if you know what quadrant it's in and you know the reference angle, then it makes it a lot easier to find those two answers. Alright, next one says cotangent is undefined. That's referring back to your chart. Cotangent is undefined at 0, at 180, and at 360. Now let's say you didn't remember that or you didn't have your chart. When cotangent's undefined, that means tangent is 0. So when tangent equals 0, well, the only times that tangent equals 0 is when you have to take your y value and put it over your x value. So that would be in the 0, because 1, 0. 0 over 1 is going to be 0, so that happens in the positive x-axis. If I do 1 over 0, that's undefined, that's not going to work. And if I do 0 over 1 here, that also gives me 0. That's the negative x-axis. So, the only times that the positive and negative x-axis occur are at 0, 180, and 360. So if you don't have your chart, you have to really know your axes. Alright, next one is negative square root of 2 over 2. I know that sine is going to be negative in the third and fourth quadrant. That's the only time sine is negative, based on the ASTC. So square root of 2 over 2, that comes from the reference angle of 45. So the angles in the third and fourth quadrant that have a reference angle of 45 are going to be 225 and 315. So if you know the reference angle where it comes from, then that helps as well. Alright, next one. So the reference angle here was 45. This one was 30. Next one says cosecant of theta is 2. Now you can always refer back to your chart, but if you don't have your chart handy, then you can just simply do the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. That means we're looking for when sine equals 1/2. Well, sine is positive in the first and second quadrant, and the only time I usually see 1/2 is at 30 degrees. So the second quadrant, the angle that has a reference angle of 30 degrees is 150. So those answers will be 30 and 150. Last but not least is secant. Secant is negative whenever cosine is negative. Well, cosine is negative, just like we found out in the first problem, in the second and third quadrant. 2 radical 3 over 3 is a reciprocal, really, of negative 3 over 2. Oh my! It winds up being the same answer as number 9. Second and third quadrant, square root of 3 over 2. That only occurs at 30, 150, 210, and 330. But since it's negative, I only want the two that have reference angles of 30 in the second and third quadrant. So that will be, again, 150 and 210. So as long as you know whose reference angle goes with who, as long as you know who's negative where, it should really, really help. And just know your chart. Okay? Alright, that takes care of that section. The next section is a little tedious, but it's worth all the work. Alright, it says find the exact values. Exact values mean no decimals. So if you have a decimal, you do not have an exact value. You have an approximation. So the exact value would mean just fractions. Okay? So it says that our terminal side lies in the second quadrant and that cosine is negative 2 over 5. Second quadrant means that sine is positive. That's basically all you need to know. So if sine is positive, that means all of our answers for sine and cosecant need to be positive. We also know that cosine is equal to x over r. Now, since there's a negative there, you know that you can't have a negative radius, so that negative is going to carry over to the top. Do not put negatives in both spaces, because if you put negatives in both spaces, remember, negative divided by negative is a positive. So that defeats the purpose of having a negative. So we're just going to move the negative to the top, meaning that x equals negative 2, r equals 5. So we're trying to find the value for y. So we use our circle formula, which is almost like Pythagorean theorem. So we have negative 2 squared plus y squared equals 5. 4 plus y squared equals 5. So I have to actually square both sides so I can get rid of that square root. So I'm left with 4 plus y squared equals 25. Minus 4 from both sides. Y squared equals 21. Take the square root. Y is going to be equal to the square root of 21. Now you're probably wondering, it says to draw the triangle, and you're like, well, where is the square root of 21? You're going to have to do an approximation. So the initial side is always, 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 always the x-axis. So you're always going to start with a horizontal line either going to the left or the right. Now the next one is going to come from where these two meet, negative 2 and square root of 21. Well, the square root of 21, if you put in your calculator just for an approximation, is equal to 4.58. So I know I'm going to count 2 to the left and up 4 and change in the middle. So basically this is where my point is, and I'm going to draw a line in that direction. Now I'm going to make my triangle, put a right angle there, and my theta is going to go right in between. Opposite from that is always your y value, so that's square root of 21. Here is going to be negative 2, and my radius I already know is 5. So once you have theta, you can just do SOHCAHTOA. You don't even have to memorize y over r, x over r, all that stuff. So the sine would be opposite over hypotenuse, so that's square root of 21 over 5. If you do the reciprocal of that for cosecant, can't have radicals in the denominator. So rationalize it, and you're left with 5 square root of 21 over 21. You can't reduce 21 and 5, so you're good. Okay, next one is cosine. We already had cosine from the previous question. So it's negative 2 over 5. That means that secant is 5 over negative 2. That's a 5. Alright, tangent is going to be opposite over adjacent. So that's square root of 21 over negative 2, which is fine. You're allowed to have radicals in the numerator. But when we do the reciprocal, can't have a radical in the denominator. So we rationalize. And we get negative 2 times the square root of 21 over 21. Notice how both cosine, secant, tangent, and cotangent are all negative. And notice that sine and cosecant are the only ones that's positive. So when you're done, this will get you full 7 points. 1 point for each of these answers, and literally just 1 point for the work and picture for a full 7 points. So if you have the work and the picture right, then there's no reason why you can't get all of these right. Alright, one more. In this one, you can actually draw the point or plot the point. Remember, your initial side is always going to be a straight line horizontally. Your terminal side actually comes from the point. So we go left 5 and up to 9. Looks like we're in the second quadrant again. Oops, that wasn't super straight, but that's okay. And then just draw your dotted line. Put a box, your theta, and label your sides. This is negative 5, 9, so you're trying to find your radius. So that's x squared plus y squared equals r squared, or you can get rid of the r squared and just automatically put the square root. Both equations are okay. Please don't use a and b because we're talking about the unit circle. So we have negative 5 squared plus 9 squared equals r. 25 plus 81. That gives you 106. So that means that r is the square root of 106. 106 does not break down. It breaks down to 53 and 2. Which is just 2 prime numbers, so it just stays the same. So now, this is the square root of 106, and we can fill in everything. So if we do opposite over hypotenuse, that's our sine, 9 over the square root of 106. And on the other side, we have the square root of 106 over 9. Uh-oh. Everything looks cool except no rationals in the denominator. So we're going to do 106 on top, 106 on the bottom, and we're left with 9 square root of 106 over 106. Now I'm just going to do 9 over 106 in my calculator just to make sure that it doesn't reduce or can get smaller, and it can't. 9 does not go into 106 evenly, so we can keep it like that. Now moving on to cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's negative 5 over square root of 106. When I do the reciprocal, it's 106 over negative 5. Dun, dun, dun. Can't have that. Must rationalize. So negative 5 square root of 106 all over 106. Okay, last one is tangent. Tangent is opposite over hypotenuse, so it's 9 over negative 5 or negative 5 over 9. Alright, so that takes care of the entire special review. So now what I'm going to do is go back and look at the unit circle. So just so that you remember certain little things. When filling in the unit circle, cosine goes in the order of 3, 2, 1, and then it starts for sine 1, 2, 3. All are positive in this quadrant. Once you go to the second quadrant, it changes. It goes to 1, 2, 3 for cosine and 3, 2, 1 for sine. The cosines are all going to be negative. The sines will stay positive. Remember that the degrees for this quadrant are 120, 135, and 150, and the reference angle for each of them reverses. So where you started off with 30, 45, 60, now you go 60, 45, 30 in this direction. In the third quadrant, you go back into the regular order that you had before. 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. But everything is negative in this quadrant except for tangent. The numbers that you should be using in this quadrant are 210, 225, 240. And the reference angles go back to the same direction, 30, 45, and 60. And when I say reference angles, I'm saying that you should have the same answer for the sine of 30 as you do for the sine of 210, except the sine of 210 will be negative. Okay, so everything is negative in this quadrant except for tangent. Tangent's positive as well as cotangent. And I forgot to say in the second quadrant, sine is positive, and as well as cosecant. Okay. All right, last quadrant is the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, we go back to the reverse order. So cosine is 1, 2, 3. Sine is 3, 2, 1. Sine is negative. Cosine stays positive. So cosine is the positive in this quadrant, and secant as well. The numbers you should be using in this quadrant are 300, 315, and 330. The reference angles also again go in a different order, 60, 45, 30. Don't forget your bow tie. It'll really help you fill this in. Alright, next we have the axes, the positive x-axis and the negative x-axis. We have on the negative x-axis side, it's 180. And on this side, it's 0 and 360. Here, tangent is going to be 0, but cotangent will be undefined. Same thing here. Cosecant, which is the opposite of sine, will also be undefined, but secant will be equal to 1. Again, this will be undefined, and secant will be equal to negative 1. And of course, we know that cosine is 1 and 0, negative 1, 0. It's very important you know who's undefined and who's 0. Okay, now when you go to the positive y-axis, these are 90 and 270. It changes. Tangent now becomes undefined. And because tangent is undefined, cotangent gets a value. It becomes 0. Cosecant, which is the opposite of sine, just stays as 1. And then on this side it becomes negative 1. And secant becomes undefined. So really pay attention to who's undefined where and when. In the positive y-axis and the negative y-axis, you notice that tangent and secant are undefined. Okay, cosine is going to be 0, sine is 1, and on the other side, cosine is 0 and sine is negative 1. Alright, one last thing, and then I'm going to be done. In questions like this, make sure that you plot the point and draw the triangle. And this is important information for your summative anyway, so it's not just for this retake. And also in these type of questions where they give you the fraction, make sure that you follow with this equation, or you can do this one. But whichever one you use, just make sure that you solve for the thing that's actually being looked for. Alright, that's it, guys. So once again, good luck. Your grades better go up. Okay, I'm doing a lot here by allowing you to have a second chance. So really good luck on everything. Please make sure you study, do your homework, which I had on the first page, and please make sure that you do better. Alright, good luck, guys. Bye.